Ever been to one of those community meetings, where they're talking about putting in a new playground or finally fixing that pothole-ridden road,
Oh, yeah,
and you walk out feeling like, does anyone actually hear what anyone else had to say?
definitely. Happens all the time.
It's like, how do you actually make these big decisions, especially in those big master planned communities? It's like walking a tightrope, right?
Yeah, it can be a real minefield trying to please everyone.
But what if there was a way to cut through all that, like figure out what people actually care about the most? That's where this Strategizer tool comes in.
It's pretty interesting, right? Instead of just going with your gut or whoever's got the loudest voice in the room, Strategizer tries to bring some actual data to the table.
Okay, so how does that even work? Is it like one of those online polls or
No,
something?
no, no. It's way more than just a yes or no kind of thing. It uses this concept, this thing called utility.
Utility,
Yeah, but don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds.
like economics jargon.
Yeah, exactly. But it's actually pretty easy to understand. Think of it like this. Utility is basically how much satisfaction or usefulness something gives you.
Okay, so like choosing between a simple coffee maker or one of those fancy ones that, can make lattes and everything.
Exactly. That fancy one might seem really cool at first, but let's be real, you're probably just hitting the regular coffee button most of the time.
Yeah, probably, like 90% of the time.
Exactly. So Strategizer, it's kind of like doing that same kind of thinking, but for a whole community. It weighs what people say something is worth to them against how much it'll cost and even how likely they are to actually use it.
That makes sense. So how does it even figure out what people prefer?
They do these surveys, but not the kind that takes forever to fill out. They've got it down to just two main things they ask about.
Two?
Yeah, how much people are willing to pay for something,
Okay.
which they call cost sensitivity, and then how often they think they'd actually use it, which is anticipated utilization.
So it's like Strategizer gets that sometimes what we want to do and what we actually end up doing are two different things.
Exactly. And by zeroing in on those two things, even though they seem simple, Strategizer can uncover a ton of info about what the community truly values.
All right, let's say there's this community and they're trying to decide between building a whole new pickleball court or finally giving their community center the upgrade it desperately needs. How would Strategizer handle that?
Well, that's where it gets interesting, right? You've got those pickleball people, and they're super passionate. So on the surface, it looks like, yeah, everyone wants this new court.
But then Strategizer comes in and says, hold on a minute.
Maybe, yeah. It could be that the survey reveals that people are actually, watching their wallets when it comes to adding something new.
Makes sense.
They're happy enough with what they've got, and they don't want their fees going up.
And then for the community center.
Well, that's a whole different story, isn't it? People might not be like shouting from the rooftops about a renovation, but the data might show that they actually use that community center a ton.
It's like the heart of the community.
Yeah, exactly. Meetings, events, fitness classes, you name it. It's where things happen.
So even if everyone seems gung-ho about pickleball at first,
Right. Strategizer digs a little deeper.
and maybe it turns out that fixing up that community center, even if it's not as exciting, actually brings way more value in the long run.
Exactly. Especially when you look at the bigger picture,
And that makes me think about all those other projects that aren't as glamorous but are super important, like infrastructure.
Oh, for sure.
Like nobody wants to talk about sewer systems,
Right.
but they're kind of essential.
Absolutely. Can't live without them.
Yeah.
And that's where this whole data-driven thing becomes even more important, I think. Because with infrastructure, it's not really a question of if it'll need fixing, it's when.
And how okay are we with the risk in the meantime?
Exactly.
So how does Strategizer deal with that whole risk tolerance thing? It's got to be more complicated than just, do you like pickleball?
Yeah, for sure. It's a whole other ballgame. It's more like, how much are you willing to spend now to avoid a major headache later?
Right, like a burst pipe or a bridge collapsing or something.
Exactly.
And I bet different communities have totally different answers to that question.
Oh, absolutely. If a community has had a lot of problems with their infrastructure in the past, they might be more willing to pay extra for something that'll last longer.
Right, they don't want to go through that again.
Exactly. But then another community might be more worried about keeping costs down now, even if it means a slightly higher chance of repairs being needed in the future.
So they're basically deciding, do we pay a little more now for peace of mind later?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Strategizer helps them figure out which approach makes the most sense for them.
Like a data-driven crystal ball?
Kind of. And don't forget about those sensitivity analyses and the Monte Carlo simulations we talked about.
Right, right.
Those are important too because they help make sure the recommendations are, solid.
Okay, so those sound kind of intimidating.
Oh, they're not that bad. Think of the sensitivity analysis like giving the data a stress test.
Okay, I like that.
So Strategizer, it basically plays around with the numbers a little bit.
Like, what if things cost more than we thought?
Yeah, exactly. Or what if something takes longer than planned, and then it sees if that changes which option comes out on top.
So it's about making sure the plan still holds up, even if there are some bumps in the road.
Exactly. And that's where those Monte Carlo things come in. Imagine you could run like thousands of different scenarios through a computer.
Okay.
See how everything plays out, all the what ifs.
You're not just looking at one possible outcome, you're looking at, like, a whole bunch of them.
Exactly. It helps you see which outcomes are most likely, so you get a much clearer picture of how happy people would be with each choice.
It's like strategizers giving a voice to everyone in the community, even the quiet ones.
Yeah, and that's really what makes this so interesting, I think. We're moving away from just gut feelings and assumptions.
And moving toward actually listening to what people want.
Exactly, and giving communities the tools they need to make decisions that really reflect what they value.
This has been a really interesting deep dive. It feels like we're on the verge of a whole new era for how communities plan for their future.
I think so too. It's about using data to make things better for everyone, whether it's a new park or fixing a road or even those big infrastructure projects.
And hey, maybe fewer of those community meetings where everyone ends up arguing.
Yeah, let's hope so. But seriously, it does make you wonder, could this work on an even bigger scale? Could we use something like Strategizer to help us tackle those really tough choices we face as a society?
Now that is a question worth thinking about.
Yeah.
How can we use this kind of data-driven decision-making to make our communities, and maybe even the world, a better place? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep those brains buzzing.